When the Russia-Ukraine conflict erupted 4 years ago, few anticipated it would become Europe's bloodiest war since World War II. Recent figures paint a shocking picture of human losses on both sides. As of early 2026, combined casualties for Russia and Ukraine are estimated to approach 2 million personnel. That is no typo. 2 million troops have been killed, wounded, or gone missing in a war many once expected to end in days. Yet the true death toll may exceed even these grim assessments. So why are accurate casualty figures so elusive? Before diving deeper, comment with number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you support peace. The conflict's origins set the stage for opacity. When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022, both Moscow and Kyiv tightly controlled information on their losses. Russia termed the operation a special military operation, inflamed minimal casualties. Ukraine, fighting for survival, had every incentive to suppress figures to preserve morale among civilians and forces. By late 2022, Western intelligence agencies released stunning estimates. The United States assessed Russian casualties at roughly 100,000 to 120,000, including killed and wounded, in the first 10 months of fighting. Ukrainian losses were judged roughly comparable during the same period. These numbers rivaled the massive engagements of World War II in Europe. But 2023 proved even deadlier. As the war shifted to a grinding war of attrition, casualty rates accelerated. The British Ministry of Defense estimated early in 2023 that Russia was losing about 700 troops per day, 200 to 300 more than in 2022. That equated to wiping out a battalion every 3 to 4 days. By mid-2023, U.S. officials estimated combined casualties for both sides had surpassed 500,000. 500,000 personnel killed or wounded in just over a year of combat. The Battle of Bakhmut, from August 2022 to May 2023, exemplified the slaughter. Wagner Group mercenaries, many recruited straight from prisons, were fed into assaults wave after wave to overwhelm Ukrainian positions. The tactic ultimately succeeded, but at horrific cost. Conservative estimates indicate Russia lost more than 20,000 personnel simply to seize a city of limited strategic value. Then came 2024, with bloodshed intensifying further. Russia adopted what military analysts call a meat grinder tactic. Small groups of poorly trained troops probed Ukrainian defenses to draw fire and reveal positions. Artillery and UAVs then pulverized those locations before the next infantry wave advanced. The approach proved highly effective at locating targets, but consumed Russian manpower at an alarming rate. By April 2025, General Christopher Cavoli, then Supreme Allied Commander Europe, estimated Russia had suffered over 790,000 killed or wounded. The British Ministry of Defense reported even higher figures, exceeding 1 million casualties by June 2025. Discrepancies in estimates stem from major tracking challenges. Neither side releases precise data, and differing methodologies yield varying results. Ukrainian losses, though lower in absolute terms, inflict proportionally greater damage given the nation's smaller population and military. In February 2025, President Zelensky stated more than 46,000 Ukrainian troops had been killed, with 380,000 wounded. He noted roughly half the wounded had recovered and returned to duty, complicating casualty accounting.
Now, in 2026, 4 full years into the conflict, the numbers have grown staggering. A comprehensive analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, published in late January 2026, estimates Russia has sustained about 1.2 million casualties since February 2022. This includes 275,000 to 325,000 killed in action. In 2025 alone, Russia lost roughly 415,000 troops, an average of nearly 35,000 casualties per month. December 2024 marked Russia's deadliest month of the entire war, averaging 1,570 casualties per day. Ukrainian casualties are estimated at 500,000 to 600,000, with 100,000 to 140,000 killed. Combined, the two nations killed and wounded hover around 1.8 million. At current rates, CSIS projects the total will exceed 2 million by spring 2026. For context, Russia's battlefield deaths in Ukraine exceed Soviet losses in Afghanistan during the 1980s by 17 times. They surpass combined Russian casualties in both Chechen wars by 11 times. In fact, Russia has lost more troops in Ukraine than in all post-World War II conflicts combined, and no major power has endured comparable losses in any war since 1945.
Yet these remain estimates, not confirmed counts, and for good reason. Both Russia and Ukraine have strong incentives to shape the narrative around casualties. Russia seeks to convince its population the special military operation proceeds as planned with acceptable losses. Ukraine must sustain Western support and domestic morale, requiring careful management of its own casualty information. Russia's approach involves systematic suppression. The Kremlin classifies all military casualty data as state secrets. Independent journalists reporting losses face up to 15 years in prison. Even using the word war instead of special military operation can trigger prosecution. Major independent outlets like Echo Moskvy and Dozhd were shuttered early in the conflict. Foreign agent laws have silenced most investigative reporting. State media and bot networks dominate the narrative, inflating Ukrainian losses while downplaying Russia's. For instance, in December 2024, a Russian Defense Ministry source claimed Ukraine had suffered nearly 1 million casualties, while Russia lost only a fraction of that. Such assertions are clearly distorted, but illustrate Moscow's willingness to disregard truth for political gain. President Vladimir Putin frames the war as a continuation of the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany, leveraging historical trauma to justify current losses. This resonates with many Russians who recall 27 million Soviet citizens killed defeating Hitler. If their forebears endured such sacrifices to defeat fascism, Putin's logic holds, modern Russia can accept casualties to defeat Ukrainian fascists.
The Kremlin also allocates massive compensation to families of killed and wounded troops. In 2024 alone, Russia disbursed over 1.2 trillion rubles, about $15.3 billion for these payments. This serves dual purposes: financial support for potentially dissenting families and internal tracking of casualties, while keeping figures hidden from the public. Ukraine's approach is more nuanced. Kyiv initially tightly controlled casualty figures to deny Russia intelligence advantages. As the war dragged on, Ukraine faced a dilemma. It needed to demonstrate effective use of Western aid weapons, meaning publicizing Russian losses, while avoiding excessive disclosure of its own that could undermine recruitment and public support. Ukrainian officials have been accused of inflating Russian casualties to highlight battlefield success. Daily tallies from Ukraine's general staff consistently report Russian losses exceeding most Western intelligence assessments' plausibility.
For example, Ukraine claimed Russia had lost over 1.247 million troops by late December 2025, a figure aligning with some Western estimates, but likely including wounded who returned to duty multiple times. President Volodymyr Zelensky has remained cautious on Ukrainian losses. He waited until February 2024, 2 years into the war, to publicly state 31,000 Ukrainian troops had been killed. Even then, many analysts believed the number understated reality. His February 2025 update to 46,000 killed still appeared conservative compared with Western intelligence estimates. Accurately counting casualties in modern war is extraordinarily difficult. Missing troops may be prisoners, deserters, or killed with bodies unrecovered. Wounded personnel can return to duty repeatedly, blurring whether they count as one casualty or multiple.
Russia's prison recruitment adds further complexity, as many lack proper documentation.
Independent verification efforts have sought to fill gaps. Mediazona, collaborating with BBC Russian Service and volunteers, has compiled a named list of Russian troops killed by scouring social media posts, local news, and government sites. As of January 13, 2026, they confirmed 163,606 Russian deaths by name. They openly acknowledge this captures only a fraction of total losses, as many families never publicize deaths, and Russian authorities actively suppress information. A disturbing revelation emerged late 2025. Russian courts had processed tens of thousands of petitions to declare troops missing or dead. By early December 2025, Mediazona identified about 88,000 such cases. On December 26, 2025, Russian courts began systematically removing these records from public databases. Defense Minister Andrei Belarusov inadvertently revealed the scale, stating that 48% of all missing personnel, 1 in every 2, have been located. If roughly 90,000 petitions represent half the missing, at least 180,000 bodies remain unrecovered on Ukrainian battlefields.
If Russia is hemorrhaging troops at this catastrophic rate, where do the replacements come from? Understanding the full scope requires examining pre- and post-war force levels, revealing a unique reality. Russia has essentially burned through its pre-war professional army and shifted to mass mobilization. In February 2022, Russia deployed about 190,000 troops, the nation's best. Contract turned out. By mid-2022, Putin could admit failure or double down. He chose the latter. In September 2022, Russia announced partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists. In practice, it disproportionately targeted ethnic minorities and men from Russia's poorest regions, the Far East, Siberia, and North Caucasus. Minority groups ultimately bore casualty rates far exceeding their population share. Even 300,000 new troops could not offset losses. Russia turned to increasingly desperate measures. Convicts, including murderers and rapists, were offered freedom for 6 months of combat service. Wagner alone recruited over 48,000 prisoners from Russian prisons. Many fed into the meat grinder at Bakhmut. Survivors returning home as heroes often committed new crimes and re-enlisted to evade prosecution. By 2024, Russia built a sustained war economy centered on recruitment. Regional authorities competed to meet monthly quotas, offering signing bonuses up to $40,000 in some areas, life-changing sums where average monthly wages hover around $500. For many Russians, especially from stagnant regions, military service became the only path to financial stability. Official Russian figures show 540,000 new contract troops recruited in 2023, 427,000 in 2024, and about 417,000 in 2025. These are not the professionals deployed in February 2022. Most receive 3 to 4 weeks of basic training before frontline deployment. They learn to operate in UAV-saturated modern battlefields under fire rather than in controlled training environments. This quality and experience gap costs Russia dearly. The pre-war army featured junior officers skilled in combined arms operations, proper artillery support, and air-ground coordination. Many are now dead. Nearly 6,500 Russian officers confirmed killed, over half junior lieutenants, first lieutenants, and captains. New officers pass through shortened programs, often just 2 months before commanding units. They learn on the job, and their troops pay the price for inexperience. The result is a Russian military unrecognizable from the 2022 invasion force. It is larger in numbers. Putin claimed 700,000 troops in Ukraine by late 2025, but degraded in quality.
Units rely on brute force and numerical superiority rather than tactical sophistication. Artillery support has grown less accurate. Communications are frequently compromised. Logistics remain a persistent weakness. U.S. intelligence estimates Russia recruits 30,000 to 40,000 new troops monthly as of early 2026, just enough to replace losses and sustain current operations, not enough for major breakthroughs or rapid advances. Russia is trapped in a recruitment death spiral, constantly replenishing forces merely to hold ground.
Compounding Russia's issues is equipment attrition. While Moscow maintains steady supplies of basics like rifles and uniforms, heavy weapons grow scarcer. Western intelligence assessments indicate Russia lost over 4,300 main battle tanks by late 2025, more than its pre-war active inventory. It has reactivated Soviet-era T-55 and T-62 tanks from deep storage, some dating to the 1960s. These antiquated tanks are crewed by hastily trained recruits facing Ukraine's modern anti-tank weapons. The outcome is predictable. Russia's production cannot replace battlefield losses fast enough. Most new tanks are decades-old vehicles pulled from storage, refurbished, and sent forward. The pattern repeats for infantry fighting vehicles, artillery systems, and armored personnel carriers. Western analysts predict that by late 2026 or early 2027, Russia will face severe armored vehicle shortages if current consumption rates continue.
So why hasn't the Russian military collapsed under these strains? And why, despite suffering more than twice Ukraine's casualties, does Russia still gain territory? The answer lies in simple math and strategic geography. Russia has a population of about 144 million, compared with Ukraine's pre-war 37 million, a nearly 4-to-1 raw advantage. Russia has roughly 18.9 million males aged 20 to 39, versus Ukraine's 5 million in the same cohort. Even with horrific losses, Russia can theoretically sustain a prolonged attrition war longer than Ukraine. Each Ukrainian killed or wounded impacts Ukraine's fighting capacity far more than a Russian equivalent does for Russia. Moscow exploits this by trading troops for incremental territorial gains. Since seizing the initiative in early 2024, CSIS estimates Russian forces advanced at an average of 50 to 200 feet per day in major offensives. That pace is slower than the Somme in World War I, one of history's most notorious bloodbaths. But Russia needs no rapid advances. It needs only to outlast Ukraine. Each month the war continues depletes Ukraine's limited manpower further. Each Ukrainian casualty is harder to replace than a Russian one. Moscow bets that Ukraine will eventually run out of willing fighters, Western support will falter, or both.
Yet Russia's presumed manpower edge has not translated into battlefield success as Putin's generals anticipated. Several factors explain why. First, Ukraine's in-depth defensive strategy has proven highly effective at multiplying Russian losses. Ukrainian forces constructed complex trench systems, anti-tank obstacles, and minefields to channel Russian advances into kill zones. When Russian infantry assaults these positions, they face artillery, mortars, and increasingly swarms of first-person view FPV UAVs delivering precise strikes on individual soldiers. UAV saturation has fundamentally altered warfare calculations. Within 10 miles of the front line, vehicle movement is nearly suicidal due to constant UAV surveillance. Second, Russia's centralized command structure has proven disastrously inflexible. Local commanders lack authority to make tactical adjustments without higher headquarters approval. This creates delays Ukraine ruthlessly exploits. By the time Russian units receive permission to adapt, Ukrainian defenders have already adjusted. Third, Russian logistics remain fundamentally broken. Ammunition arrives, fuel eventually reaches units, but coordination across different formations is poor.
Artillery support often fails to synchronize with infantry advances. When available, air support integrates poorly with ground operations. The combined arms integration Russian doctrine emphasizes has largely failed to materialize. Fourth, morale remains a persistent issue. Troops recruited with cash bonuses and rushed to the front with minimal training lack the motivation of Ukrainians defending their homeland. Russian units have experienced mass surrenders, particularly during Ukraine's incursion into Kursk Oblast, where over 1,000 Russian troops were captured in the operation's early months. The Kursk incursion starkly illustrated Russia's deficiencies in strategy and logistics. When Ukraine invaded Russian territory in August 2024, it took Moscow over a month to organize a counteroffensive. Russia was forced to pull units from other front sectors, creating temporary vulnerabilities Ukraine exploited. Russia even deployed about 11,000 North Korean troops to help reclaim its own soil. The core problem: Russia fights a 20th century attrition war in a 21st century battlespace.
Russia's advantages in manpower and industrial capacity are systematically negated by Ukrainian tactical innovation, Western technological support, and the UAV warfare revolution. Despite far fewer troops and equipment, Ukraine has consistently out-innovated its larger foe. Ukrainian forces pioneered adaptations of commercial UAVs for military use. They developed electronic warfare systems to spoof Russian guidance signals. They fielded fiber-optic guided UAVs immune to jamming. They turned consumer electronics into precision-guided munitions. Meanwhile, Russia is sliding towards second-tier power status, even as it exhausts itself conquering a neighbor. Its economy strains under severe pressure. Manufacturing declines. Inflation persists at high levels. Economic growth slowed to 0.6% in 2025. The defense industry faces critical shortages of components, many previously imported from the West before sanctions took effect. The true death toll of the Ukraine war represents erased futures, destroyed potential, and permanent scars on two nations. Whether the final count reaches 1.5 million, 2 million, or beyond, each figure stands for a person who will never return home. That is the real cost of this war, and it is the price Russia and Ukraine continue paying every day. Comment with number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you support peace.